He thought it would be a night of pleasure, but by morning his body was fighting for its life. After spending hours with a 71-year-old woman, his manhood began to rot away. What started as a secret affair behind closed doors would spiral into a chilling case that left doctors, detectives, and the entire community speechless. Stay with me, because this story is darker and more disturbing than you can imagine. You're watching Dark Motives, the channel that uncovers some of the most shocking and disturbing true crime cases from around the world. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a story like this one. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because the twists in this case will leave you stunned. And while you're here, drop a comment below and let me know. Where are you watching from? I love seeing how far our stories reach. Our story takes us to Jacksonville, Florida, a city known for its beaches, nightlife, and secrets that often stay buried until it's too late. The man at the center of this disturbing case was Marcus Green, a 32-year-old construction worker. He lived a restless life, chasing thrills, quick money, and fleeting relationships. Those who knew Marcus described him as charming on the surface, but reckless when it came to the choices he made behind closed doors. The woman was Evelyn Parker, a 71-year-old widow who had lived in Jacksonville her entire life. To neighbors, she was polite and soft-spoken, someone you'd never suspect of having any kind of scandal attached to her name. But beneath that quiet image was a loneliness she tried desperately to escape. Two people generations apart with nothing in common, until one night brought them together in a way no one could have predicted. Marcus first met Evelyn inside a dimly lit bar not far from downtown Jacksonville. It wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect to find someone her age. Most of the crowd was in their 20s and 30s, chasing cheap drinks and late-night music. But Evelyn sat at the far end of the bar, nursing a glass of red wine, her silver hair tied neatly back. Marcus noticed her immediately, not because she fit in, but because she didn't. To Marcus, she was a challenge, something unusual, something he could brag about later. He slid into the empty stool beside her, flashing the same confident smile he used on women half her age. Evelyn didn't look away. Instead, she studied him with eyes that seemed far older and wiser than the room they were in. What started as small talk about the weather quickly shifted into something heavier: loneliness, regret, and the aching need for connection. The two of them left the bar together just after midnight. Neighbors would later recall seeing Marcus walking Evelyn up the front steps of her small single-story home on the east side of the city. To anyone watching, it looked like an unlikely pair: a young man with tattoos running down his arm, and an elderly woman clutching his hand as if she had just been given a second chance at life. Behind closed doors, the encounter took a darker turn. Marcus, driven by lust and impulse, ignored the sharp difference in their ages. Evelyn, desperate to feel alive again, allowed it to happen. Hours passed in silence except for the muffled sounds coming from her bedroom. What Marcus thought was just another night of reckless pleasure was slowly setting the stage for something far more dangerous. By morning, Evelyn believed her loneliness had finally been cured, at least for a moment. But Marcus woke up to a nightmare, one he would never forget. The sun was just starting to rise over Jacksonville when Marcus stirred awake. His head pounded from the alcohol, and for a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Then he glanced around the unfamiliar bedroom: lace curtains, family portraits on the wall, and Evelyn still sleeping soundly beside him. It should have been nothing more than an awkward morning-after moment, but Marcus felt something was wrong. A dull, burning sensation spread through his lower body. At first, he brushed it off, thinking it was exhaustion from the long night. But as he shifted in bed, the pain grew sharper, almost unbearable. Panic crept in. He looked under the covers, and what he saw made his stomach twist. His manhood was swollen, discolored, and beginning to show signs of something unnatural. Marcus stumbled out of bed, clutching himself, trying to convince himself it was nothing serious. He locked himself in the bathroom, turning on the harsh yellow light. The reflection staring back at him in the mirror was one of sheer horror. His body was betraying him in ways he had never imagined. He splashed cold water on his face, But the burning didn't stop. The more he looked, the more he realized this wasn't something that would go away on its own. In the next room, Evelyn remained quiet, almost unaware of the storm brewing inside her young lover. To Marcus, the walls began to close in. Every second in that house felt like a trap, as if he had stepped into something he could never escape. By the time Evelyn finally woke, Marcus was pacing the floor, drenched in sweat. His charm and confidence from the night before had vanished, replaced by fear and confusion. What started as a reckless choice hours earlier had now become a living nightmare, and he had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Marcus tried to hide his fear, but it was impossible. Every step he took sent a stabbing pain through his body. His hands shook as he pulled on his clothes, his mind racing with questions he didn't want to answer. How could one night turn into something so terrifying? Evelyn, now fully awake, noticed the panic in his eyes. She asked what was wrong, her voice trembling, but Marcus snapped back, refusing to admit what he had just seen in the bathroom mirror. He didn't want to sound weak, and more than that, he didn't want to face the truth. The more he denied it, the more the pain grew, eating away at his confidence like acid. By mid-morning, he could barely stand still. The burning had spread deeper, and his skin had taken on a sickening shade that made him nauseous just to look at. He tried pacing, tried lying down, tried ignoring it altogether, but nothing worked. Every hour that passed felt like a countdown ticking louder in his ears. Finally, Marcus left Evelyn's house without a word, storming into the hot Jacksonville streets. He told himself he just needed time, maybe some over-the-counter medicine, maybe rest. But in his gut, he knew something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just a rash or a small infection. His body was shutting down, and fast. As he stumbled toward his car, drenched in sweat, one thought circled through his mind. If anyone discovered what had happened the night before, his reputation would be destroyed. But Marcus had no idea that what was happening to his body wasn't just personal shame. It was about to draw in doctors, police, and eventually investigators who would unravel a story darker than anyone expected. By noon, Marcus couldn't take it anymore. The pain had spread through his lower body like fire, and every movement felt like knives digging into his flesh. His pride had kept him silent, but his body was forcing him to surrender. He drove himself to the UF Health Hospital in Jacksonville, clutching the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When he walked into the emergency room, nurses immediately noticed his condition. He was pale, sweating, and struggling to stand upright. At first, he refused to explain, muttering only that he was in pain. But when the doctors pressed, Marcus finally whispered the truth, and their expression shifted from concern to alarm. He was rushed into an examination room. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the medical team examined him, and what they saw left them speechless. His manhood was blackened, swollen, and giving off signs of rapid tissue decay. This wasn't an ordinary infection, it was something far worse. Something that could spread and take his life within hours. The doctors didn't waste a second. They ordered immediate tests, drew blood, and prepped Marcus for emergency care. But behind their urgency was fear. Cases like this were rare, almost unheard of, and the speed of his decline suggested something more sinister than just poor health or bad luck. Marcus lay on the hospital bed, his confidence stripped away, staring at the ceiling with wide, terrified eyes. The same man who had swaggered into a bar the night before was now clinging to survival, while whispers spread through the hospital corridors. Something about his story didn't add up, and soon both the medical team and investigators would start asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. Hours later, the test results came back, and they confirmed what the doctors feared. Marcus was suffering from a rare and aggressive bacterial infection. It wasn't something picked up casually. This strain was so deadly that if left untreated, it would eat away at his flesh until there was nothing left to save. The term whispered among the medical staff was necrotizing fasciitis, often called a flesh-eating disease. The doctors wasted no time. They informed Marcus that his condition was critical. Without immediate surgery, not only would he lose his manhood, but the infection could spread into his bloodstream and kill him within days. For Marcus, the words felt unreal. Just hours earlier, he thought he was untouchable, living wild without consequence. Now his life hung by a thread. But what disturbed the doctors most was how he had contracted it. Infections this severe didn't just appear out of nowhere. They pressed Marcus with questions. Where had he been? Who had he been with? What exactly had happened the night before? His vague, stuttering answers only raised more suspicion. Meanwhile, whispers began to circulate in the hospital hallways. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances. A healthy young man, suddenly rotting from the inside out after a single night. Something didn't sit right. Behind the closed doors of the infectious disease unit, the case was already being flagged for further review. Marcus, lying helpless under the bright hospital lights, realized his nightmare was only beginning. What started as a night of forbidden pleasure had become a battle against death itself. And now doctors weren't the only ones watching him closely. By the second day of his hospital stay, Marcus's case was no longer just a medical emergency. It was now a matter of criminal concern. The unusual nature of his condition, combined with the vague details of how it started, raised red flags. Hospital staff quietly contacted the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and soon, detectives were standing at his bedside. Marcus tried to play it down. He told them he had been drinking, that he barely remembered what happened. But detectives had already done their homework. They knew where he had been the night before, and they knew the woman who brought him home. Evelyn Parker's name surfaced quickly, and investigators became curious about the role she played in all of this. Detectives visited Evelyn's small home on the east side of the city. She answered the door calmly, but her frail figure and trembling hands betrayed the weight she was carrying. Evelyn admitted Marcus had spent the night there but insisted nothing unusual happened. To her, it was just two lonely people sharing company. But investigators weren't satisfied. They noticed inconsistencies in her story, gaps in the timeline, and details she seemed too quick to dismiss. Back at the hospital, Marcus's condition worsened. The infection was spreading despite aggressive treatment, and doctors warned he might not make it if drastic steps weren't taken. The detectives pressed harder, convinced that this wasn't just a tragic accident. Something, or someone, had introduced the deadly bacteria into his body, and they needed to know how. What was supposed to be a private affair had now exploded into a full-blown investigation. The case was no longer just about Marcus's failing health. It was about uncovering whether Evelyn Parker had a dark secret of her own. Detectives began digging into Evelyn Parker's past, and what they uncovered was enough to shift the entire direction of the case. On the surface, she was a quiet widow, a woman who had lived in Jacksonville her entire life without causing trouble. But old records told a different story. Years earlier, Evelyn had been investigated for negligence after her late husband's sudden death. Though no charges were ever filed, whispers among neighbors hinted that her home had always carried an air of sickness and decay. Investigators learned that Evelyn had once worked as a part-time caregiver, moving between nursing homes and private residences. Several complaints had been filed during her employment, patients developing strange infections, sudden health declines, and in some cases, unexplained deaths. Nothing was ever proven, but the pattern was too disturbing to ignore. When detectives confronted her with these findings, Evelyn broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she claimed she never meant to hurt anyone. She admitted that her house hadn't been properly cleaned in years, that mold and unsanitary conditions had built up around her without her realizing the danger. But detectives suspected it was more than just neglect. The strain of bacteria ravaging Marcus's body wasn't common. It suggested exposure to something rare, something most people would never encounter by accident. Marcus, still lying in his hospital bed, was told of Evelyn's past. His fear turned to rage. He accused her of destroying his life, of knowing exactly what she was doing when she invited him inside. Whether Evelyn had malicious intent or not, the damage was already done, and Marcus's body was evidence of it. With his condition worsening by the hour, and Evelyn's past painting a darker picture than anyone imagined, investigators faced a chilling possibility. What if Marcus wasn't her first victim? Doctors made the hardest decision of Marcus's life. In order to save him, they had no choice but to perform emergency surgery, removing parts of his body that had already begun to rot. The man who walked into Evelyn's home full of pride and lust would never leave the hospital the same again. He survived, but at a cost he would carry for the rest of his days. As for Evelyn Parker, the investigation into her past deepened. Authorities examined her home, finding unsanitary conditions that could have bred the very bacteria that nearly killed Marcus. Old case files were reopened, and though she denied intentionally harming anyone, her name became forever tied to a series of strange and unsettling incidents that stretched back decades. The community of Jacksonville was left divided. Some saw Evelyn as a lonely woman who simply wanted companionship and made reckless mistakes. Others believed she was far more dangerous, a quiet predator whose home and history carried death like a shadow. Marcus never fully recovered. The trauma of that night haunted him, a constant reminder of how one reckless choice had nearly cost him everything. For investigators, the case became a warning, a reminder that true crime isn't always about cold-blooded killers or carefully planned attacks. Sometimes it begins with something as simple as desire, and ends with devastation. This case remains one of the most disturbing stories to emerge from Jacksonville, not because of a body found in the woods, but because of how quickly life can unravel behind closed doors. Thank you for watching Dark Motives. If you found this case as shocking as I did, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next story. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing your responses, and it helps this community grow. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.